On this very interesting topic, we're most delighted to be joined by Mr. Samir Abbass, and he's a researcher and Egyptologist. First of all, good morning, sir, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Karim. Good morning, Nancy.
It's always a pleasure having you with us. Tell me a little bit more about, do we know why January the 15th was chosen as Aswan's National Day?
So that was the day when they finished building the high dam in Aswan, and that's make a very big impact all over Egypt in the modern history of Egypt. So before building the high dam, the Nile River had an annual flood, which is the water of the Nile was fluctuating between high and low, and that was causing problems because we were not able to cultivate our lands, the fertile lands of the Nile Valley, all the year round. It was only seasonally. So without the high dam, it was nearly impossible to feed the growing population of Egypt. Also to protect Egypt and Nile Valley from some of the threats of high floods or even low floods, which is causing famine, and that was traced all over the history of Egypt. And the high dam has some setbacks as well, like any human inventions or projects. But so far, I think that we are more enjoying the advantages more than the disadvantages. Maybe in the future we might suffer from some of the disadvantages of building the high dam. So since you started actually your topic by talking about the high dam and talking about the impact of the high dam, one of the biggest impacts of the high dam is creating a big lake, 500 kilometers long, from the south of Aswan, south of the high dam, all into the Sudanese border, which is known as Lake Nasser today. So in our talk today, I'm planning to cover the hidden treasures in Aswan and around, and that is one of our mini episodes, which is we started almost like 4 or 5 weeks ago so far, and that could be number 5 or 6 today about talking about hidden treasures of Egypt in general. There is a very important link, a very strong link between building the high dam and the hidden treasures actually in Egypt in this particular part, because building the high dams, one of the side effects of building the high dams is the submerge of the Nile Valley to the south of Aswan into the Sudanese land, and that's which is called the Nubian lands. So that was one of there was many villages, or actually all of the villages and people has been relocated from this site into other villages as well, leaving behind the farms and the villages, and the most important, that the ancient Egyptian temples, which is built along these areas. So that's one of the hidden treasures. We know from this temple, which is the most famous one of them, and that was the biggest project of relocating a monument, and that was which is held in 1964, Abu Simbel temple. So, but apart from Abu Simbel temple, which is classified as ancient Egyptian and Nubian temple at the same time, is we have also other temples, hidden treasures between Aswan and Abu Simbel. Abu Simbel lies close to the Sudanese border, but between Aswan and Abu Simbel there was all of this route, which is for nearly, like on road now, for nearly 280 kilometers. It had lots of temples along the way and lots of ancient Egyptian monuments. Unfortunately, not all of them has been saved. But the most important has been saved. Talk about Kalabsha temple, which has been relocated to the south of the high dam. When you go and visit the high dam, just from standing in a viewpoint, you can see Kalabsha temple with a naked eye. But further, that's easy to reach. But further south, we have Amada, we have Subua, we have Qasr Ibrahim, these are difficult to reach, and that's rarely visited, unless by people taking a Nile cruise in Lake Nasser, and there is very few of these cruises were happening. So starting actually this topic, Aswan is a large area, and that's we are talking about the border of Egypt to the south. And Aswan also had a very important influence in the ancient Egyptian civilization, considering the ancient Egyptian civilization has an African roots. And in ancient Egypt, the root of the Egyptian civilization was started from south to north. And there is many proofers at Nabta Playa, which is not far from Abu Simbel. Nabta Playa, which has the oldest Stonehenge, which is known in the whole world, a very sophisticated community lived in Egypt. That was 5,000 BC, 7,000 years ago. 2,000 years before the beginning of the documented civilization in Egypt, we have Nabta Playa. So to start from south to north, it does make sense, because that's how the civilization in ancient Egypt advanced from south to north. So we talked about now an Abu Simbel, which is not the hidden treasures, but that was a very important landmark there. We talked about some of the Nubian temples, which is along this route between Abu Simbel and Aswan. So we talked now about Nabta Playa as well, which is the oldest of them all, and that's considered the beginning or beginning of civilization in the south and the North Nile Valley, which is talking about Egypt. So moving to the north. So we have Kalabsha Temple, which is now is located near to the high dam, but actually the original location was 60 kilometers to the south
so
of the high dam.
Moved.
Exactly.
Right.
Then moving further to the north, so we have the area between the high dam and the old dam, and that's always confusing actually, because we had the high dam is a very, very well known dam, but in Aswan we have two dams, the old dam and the new dam. The area in between, it has lots of islands, and these islands has Nubian communities living there. The most famous of them, which is not hidden treasure, is Philae Temple, lies in one of these islands. But apart from Philae Temple, there is other islands like Hissa Island and Angelica as well. And these islands, which has a significant Nubian community, and it is attraction today. So today I'm not only planning to talk about ancient history, I'm planning to talk about things which attract people attention, especially foreigners. When those who visit Aswan now, the highlight of Aswan is the Nile River and the Nubian communities living there. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes.
Sorry, a little bit more about the Nubian community there, and how can, as tourists, are they welcoming that because every time you go, they sort of tell you that they're very private and they don't really like a lot of tourists to visit. But is that necessarily true?
That's a very interesting topic, and thanks for asking this question, because the Nubians, they have their own distinct cultures, and they are, as I know them, they are some of the most generous actually people living in Egypt. So, and they keep the balance between welcoming strangers and also in the same time keeping their own local culture. And that could be actually like a topic in its own, how they manage to make this balance. But from my personal experience, that visitors and going to Nubian villages, Nubian communities, they are very much welcome. And it's became a kind of tourism now. So unfortunately, in some places it exceeded the limit to be very touristy. It's not genuine anymore. But it's still in most of the Nubian villages still very keeping their local tradition, and even there is not much tourists actually going there, but that is the best place to go there. And our challenge, as tour operators, as a government as well, is to help the Nubian community to keep the good values they have and develop these communities as well without making them looks like any other community. Because if it has been developed, these villages developed in a way like any other village or any other town in the Nile Valley, they are losing their advantage. And their language as well, that was also very, they have their own language and they have their own culture, and their language unfortunately the new generation, they are not keeping the language like the old generation. And I think that one of the very good solution could be is having tailored curriculum for Aswan, and in this curriculum the schools, they teach not only the Aswan attractions, but also they teach the Nubian language, because otherwise it might extend. And we know how important the great role this language played in the communication in 6th of October War.
Yes, Mr. Samir, one of the most important recommendations of the last World Youth Forum was declaring Aswan as the capital of youth in 2019. What have you done as tour guides in order to exploit this situation and propagate for the hidden treasures and the attractions and so on and so forth?
So what I'm doing now, and what I was doing actually in the last 15 years in Aswan, so I'm trying always to find new routes and new itineraries and new attractions, and to bring people back and back and back. I have regular guests, which is they are keeping coming back, and they love the idea of staying in villages. I remember that was nearly 12 years ago, which is when I spoke with one of my assistants who are in Aswan, and when I looked at, we were taking a boat trip, and we were doing some exploration trip to see other attractions to add, and I looked at the west bank of the Nile River there, and told literally that is the future of Aswan, of not building regular style hotels, 5 stars European style hotels, but
Nubian house.
Exactly, Nubian guest houses, and which is keep the Nubian architecture atmosphere, and which has this beautiful view of the Nile River with the desert in the background, which is a very beautiful contrast. You have the desert, the sand dunes, the mountain, and then the green strip, and then the Nile River. And I told him literally that will be the future.
And beautiful distinct colors as well, because they love to paint their houses.
Exactly, with the beautiful colors.
Yes.
And I told him literally that will be the future of Aswan. So nowadays, that is one of the most fastest growing in accommodation Aswan. So in almost in all of the island there is a competition now because there was one or two started first and they make a very good fame, and now almost everybody will see. I think that will be a very good way actually to support Aswan and the Nubian communities living in Aswan as well. I remember that one of my dreams when I was fresh graduates after graduated from the tourism college, I was planning actually to move to Aswan, living there, building a small house at the Nile Valley with the desert in the background, and have a small boat and working as a local tour guide there, and especially that they have a very good basketball team there, and I was playing in the Egyptian League in that time, so all of my life would be covered in that time. But so
could you tell us a little bit more about the famous monuments as well as the not so popular ones?
Sure. You know, so I will just mention them by names,
Right.
which is like Philae Temple, like the Haidam, of course, like the unfinished Obelisk. These are the famous monuments in Aswan. Another monuments which is not very well known, that will be, for example, Saint Simon or Saint Simon Monastery. Dates back to the 7th century.
Right.
Beautiful one in the high mountain overlooking the Nile Valley. It's had a great role in history. They were not only serving actually monks there, but was also serving Muslim pilgrims traveling from Sudan across Egypt to go to Saudi Arabia. So, and that was all documented in the graffitis on the wall there. So apart from that, we have also the Nubian Museum. A beautiful building. The building in its own is like a masterpiece. So the collection there is the most unique all over the world because it tracing and explaining very well this rich culture and history in Egypt and Sudan. Apart from that, we have the unfinished Obelisk, which is one of the famous, actually, which is like famous monuments there, which is a very ancient quarry, which has the biggest obelisk, 42 meters height in the heart of Aswan, which makes you wondering how they cut it and how they were planning to move it as one piece to be erected in Karnak Temple or whatever. So, but across the street from the unfinished obelisk, we have the Fatimite cemetery, which is still used as a local cemetery today. It's just across the street. So nobody bother with that at all, just when we drive by. But going inside, I remember that I took some of my friends there, foreigners, and they were really amazed by sitting and seeing the people coming to visit the graves of their friends, relatives, but not only, there is historical shrines there still receiving the attention and pilgrims of the people until today. And to see these ancient rituals is still in continue until today, that was a highlight for them. So in another hidden treasure of Aswan, which is Elephantine Island. The Elephantine Island is the beginning of what's called Aswan today. Aswan in the ancient time, that was Elephantine Island, and what is on Elephantine Island, then extended actually around after that. Elephantine Island is divided into two sections. The Nubian village, actually 3 sections, you know, one which has had a very famous hotel there, the middle one is the Nubian villages, and the southern part is the most condensed archaeological site in Egypt and maybe in the whole world. In a small site, but you can trace Egyptian history from the Old Kingdom with some of the oldest temples built and preserved in Egypt there till Alexander and Ptolemies and Romans, Christians and Muslims and Jews even. The whole history timeline of Egypt, from the ancient Egyptians across to the Greeks, Romans, Christians, Jewish,
Mr.
Muslims.
Samir, sorry to cut you off, but unfortunately we're running out of time. But as always, we really do appreciate your insight, Mr. Samir Abbass, a researcher and Egyptologist. Thank you so much for being with us.